Rebecca stood frozen at the bakery counter, her hand trembling as she clutched her worn leather purse. Behind her, she could hear the soft breathing of her 5-year-old son Tommy, who had been staring at that chocolate superhero cake for weeks. The price tag glared back at her like a cruel joke. $42.99. She had counted her money 3 times that morning, hoping somehow the numbers would change. But math doesn't lie, and neither did the $28.60 in her wallet. "I'm so sorry," Rebecca whispered to Mrs. Patterson, the kind baker who owned the shop. "Something came up. We can't get the cake today." Mrs. Patterson nodded gently, understanding in her eyes. She had seen this before, mothers doing their best, coming up short, and leaving with broken hearts hidden behind brave smiles. Hello family, welcome back. Please take a moment to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. It truly means a lot to us. Don't forget to share it with your friends and loved ones and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. So sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Rebecca turned to leave, keeping her head down. She squeezed Tommy's small hand, hoping he wouldn't see the tears gathering in her eyes. The bakery was decorated with orange pumpkins and autumn leaves, a cheerful place meant for celebrations. Right now, she felt like she didn't belong there at all. "Will we still have candles at home?" Tommy asked, his voice small and hopeful. The question pierced her heart like a knife. "We have some," she managed to say. "Remember the ones from last year?" Tommy nodded, still believing in her, still trusting that everything would be okay. That trust felt heavier than anything else she carried. Her fingers touched the cold metal of the door handle. One more step and they would be outside, away from the sweet smell of vanilla and cinnamon, away from the birthday cake Tommy had dreamed about for weeks. Then a voice cut through the quiet bakery like thunder on a clear day. "Give them the cake. I'll pay for it." Rebecca froze. Her hand stayed on the door handle, but her feet wouldn't move. For a second she thought she had imagined it, her desperate mind creating words that weren't really there. But when she turned around she saw him. A tall man in a dark wool coat stood near the corner of the bakery. He looked confident and calm, like someone used to making decisions and seeing them through. Tommy tugged at her coat. "Mommy, what's happening?" Rebecca couldn't answer. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She stared at the stranger, trying to understand why someone would do this for people he didn't even know. Who was this man and what did he want? The man took a step forward, his hands resting calmly in his coat pockets. His eyes were warm and steady, not filled with pity but with something else, something that looked like genuine kindness. "Seriously," he said with a gentle smile. "Let him have the cake." Rebecca's first thought was embarrassment. Her second was confusion. Why would a complete stranger pay for her son's birthday cake? Was this some kind of joke? Was he going to ask for something in return? Tommy turned around too, looking up at the stranger with wide, curious eyes. He didn't understand everything that was happening, but he knew it was something good. His small hand tugged at Rebecca's coat again. "Mommy, is it okay?" Rebecca swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. She looked at Mrs. Patterson, who was already reaching for the cake box with a knowing smile on her face. "You really don't have to do this," Rebecca finally said, her voice tight with emotion. "I know," the man replied gently. "But I want to." "He's 5 today, right?" Rebecca blinked, surprised. "Yes, today." "Then it's settled," the stranger said with a warm smile. "Every 5-year-old deserves a birthday cake." Mrs. Patterson carefully placed the cake in a white box and slid it across the counter. The man stepped forward and handed her a black credit card without hesitation. The payment went through instantly, and Mrs. Patterson handed him a receipt with a smile. Rebecca stood there, stunned. Her hand trembled as she reached for the cake box. She still couldn't process what was happening. A stranger had just paid for her son's birthday cake, and she didn't even know his name. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I mean it. You didn't have to do this." "I know," the man said again, his smile growing wider. "But I'm glad I could." He knelt down to Tommy's level, looking directly into the boy's eyes with kindness and respect. "What's your name, little man?" Tommy stood up straighter, his confidence returning. "Tommy. I'm 5 today." "No kidding," the man said with genuine enthusiasm. "Well, Tommy, happy birthday. That's a serious milestone. You know what being 5 means." Tommy shook his head, his eyes wide with curiosity. "It means you're officially a superhero now." Tommy giggled and looked up at his mother, who was smiling for the first time all morning. Rebecca watched the stranger talk to her son like they mattered, not with pity or sympathy, but like he truly saw them as people worth his time. The man stood up and turned to Rebecca. I'm James, by the way. She hesitated for just a moment. Rebecca. There was a pause, thick with unspoken words. Rebecca wanted to say more, but she didn't know what would be appropriate. Thank you, didn't feel big enough for what had just happened. James seemed to sense her struggle. Tell you what, he said thoughtfully. There's a park not far from here, right? Riverside Park, Rebecca replied automatically. Perfect. It's a beautiful day. Would you mind if I joined you two for the birthday cake? I'd love to see Tommy blow out those candles. What would Rebecca decide? Rebecca stared at James, uncertain about what to say. Her protective instincts kicked in immediately. This was a stranger after all, and she had a son to protect. Every mother knows to be careful, to guard against people who might want something in return. But there was something about James that felt different. His tone wasn't pushy or demanding. He wasn't trying to impress her or make her feel like she owed him anything. He just seemed kind, genuinely kind, in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Tommy was already tugging at her coat again, his eyes bright with excitement. Can we, Mom? Please, please, please? Rebecca looked down at her son's eager face, then back up at James, who waited patiently without any pressure in his expression. A battle raged inside her head, caution against hope, fear against trust. Then a quieter voice whispered deep inside her heart. People like this don't come around often. Maybe it's okay to let kindness in just this once. She nodded slowly. Okay. The park sounds good. James smiled, and Rebecca could see relief mixed with happiness in his eyes. Great. I'll grab some napkins and forks from here. I'll meet you there in a few minutes. As Rebecca and Tommy stepped out into the crisp autumn air, she felt something shift inside her chest. The weight she carried every single day, the pressure, the loneliness, the constant guilt of never being enough, felt just a little bit lighter. Behind them, the bell above the bakery door chimed as James followed with quiet intention. The walk to Riverside Park took only 10 minutes. Leaves crunched softly beneath their feet as they made their way along the familiar path. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting golden light across the playground and wooden benches. This was one of Rebecca's favorite places. It was small and tucked away behind the elementary school, quieter than the bigger parks in town. She liked it because Tommy had space to run and play while she had space to breathe and think. Tommy clutched the cake box like it was the most precious treasure in the world. He walked carefully, watching each step to make sure he didn't trip or drop it. Do you think he'll really come? Tommy asked, craning his neck to look behind them. I think so, Rebecca replied, adjusting her scarf against the cool breeze. He said he would. A few minutes later, they reached a wooden picnic table under a large maple tree. The tree's leaves were bright red and orange, creating a canopy of autumn colors above them. Rebecca pulled out some tissues from her purse to wipe off the table surface, then sat down while Tommy placed the cake box in the center with a proud smile. I can't believe we have the superhero cake, Tommy whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Rebecca smiled, though a familiar pang of guilt hit her chest again. She hadn't been able to give it to him herself. Someone else had stepped in when she couldn't. But even as that thought crossed her mind, she reminded herself of what mattered most. Tommy was happy, and that was everything. Just then, footsteps approached from the path. Rebecca looked up to see James walking toward them, carrying a small brown paper bag in one hand and plastic forks, plates, and napkins in the other. He wasn't rushing. He strolled casually, like someone who had nowhere else more important to be. And that simple act, just being present, just showing up, was a kindness Rebecca hadn't felt in a very long time. But as James sat down at their table, Rebecca couldn't help but wonder, what did this man really want? Sorry I took a little longer, James said as he set everything down on the table. The cashier insisted on double bagging this. He lifted the brown paper bag with a grin. Chocolate milk and juice boxes. Couldn't have a proper birthday party without drinks, right? Tommy's eyes lit up like fireworks. Awesome. Rebecca blinked at the gesture, overwhelmed once again. You didn't have to do that. James shrugged casually. It's a party, isn't it? They sat together at the wooden bench, and James let Tommy open the cake box himself. The boy peeled it open carefully, gasping with pure joy at the sight of the bright blue frosting and superhero symbols decorating the top. Rebecca pulled out 5 tiny candles from her purse, the same ones they had used the year before. She had kept them, never knowing if she would be able to afford a cake to put them in. No way you remember to bring candles too, James said with a playful grin. Rebecca smiled, feeling a little less embarrassed. Always have a backup plan. They stuck the candles into the soft frosting. James struck a match and carefully shielded the tiny flames from the breeze with his hand as the candles flickered to life. All right, Tommy, James said, leaning back. Make your wish. Tommy looked at the glowing candles, then at James, then up at his mother. His face grew unusually serious for a 5-year-old boy, and he squeezed his eyes shut tight. Rebecca watched him, her heart tugging painfully in her chest. What would a child like Tommy wish for? More toys? A new video game? Or something deeper, something that broke her heart to think about, like a father who stayed or enough money so his mother didn't cry at night? Tommy opened his eyes and grinned wide. Then he blew out all 5 candles with one mighty puff. The flames disappeared and James clapped enthusiastically. Well done, superhero. Tommy beamed with pride, his chest puffing out. Rebecca helped cut the cake, handing out slices on small white plates. For the next few minutes, everything felt suspended in time, warm, sweet, and peaceful. They ate and laughed together. Tommy got blue frosting smeared across his nose, and James offered him a napkin while making a silly face that sent Tommy into fits of uncontrollable giggles. Rebecca found herself smiling more than she had in weeks, maybe even months. The tension she always carried in her shoulders began to fade. The constant worry that lived in her mind grew quieter. When the cake was nearly finished, James leaned on the table thoughtfully. So, Tommy, he said, how do you feel about roller coasters? Tommy's eyes went wide with excitement. I've never been on one. James raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. Never? Rebecca chuckled. I don't think I've even driven past an amusement park since he was born. Well, that's a tragedy, James said with exaggerated seriousness. I think we need to change that immediately. There's an amusement park about 20 minutes from here. Are you guys busy for the rest of the day? Rebecca blinked, caught off guard. You mean right now? If you're up for it, James said, his tone casual but hopeful. My treat, of course. It's still early and birthdays only happen once a year. Tommy looked up at his mother with pleading eyes. Please, Mom. Please, please, please. Rebecca's instincts warred with each other once again. This was sudden and unexpected. But then again, this entire day had been unexpected from the very beginning. James didn't feel like a threat. He didn't feel like someone trying to show off or manipulate them. He felt like someone who simply wanted to make a child happy on his birthday. She looked at Tommy's eager face, then at James, who waited patiently without any pressure. Finally, she made her decision, but would she regret it? Rebecca took a deep breath and nodded. All right. But only a few rides. Tommy jumped up from the bench, throwing his arms in the air. Best birthday ever. James grinned, standing up and helping to clean the table. Let's go make it even better. And just like that, they packed up what was left of the cake and walked toward the parking lot. Rebecca and Tommy climbed into her old hatchback, while James followed behind them in a sleek black SUV. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the trees, Rebecca found herself wondering, not with fear but with quiet curiosity, what kind of person just shows up, does all this and expects nothing in return? She didn't know the answer yet. But somehow she was beginning to feel that maybe it wasn't just kindness. Maybe this was the start of something more. The Ferris wheel lit up against the dusky sky, a soft glow of blues and golds twinkling with every slow revolution. Laughter floated on the wind, mixing with the scent of kettle corn, fried dough, and the unmistakable sweetness of candy apples. Rebecca stood just outside the entrance to one of the rides, watching as Tommy, his cheeks still stained with blue frosting, stood beside James. His small hand was tucked trustingly into the man's larger one. They were next in line for the bumper cars. Tommy was bouncing on his toes with excitement, and James was smiling in that easy, attentive way of his, not just politely engaged but truly present. Rebecca wasn't used to this. Not the amusement park. Not the kind gestures. She wasn't used to someone else standing beside her son like that, like they belonged together. Not since Tommy's father had walked out before his second birthday. Since then, it had been just the two of them. Every birthday, every scraped knee, every night she worked late and prayed he wouldn't wake up crying for her. James glanced over his shoulder, caught her watching, and gave a small, warm wave. Rebecca waved back, her chest tightening with something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not nervousness. Something else she couldn't quite name. Later they walked the length of the midway. Tommy was sandwiched happily between them, gripping both of their hands and swinging his arms as they passed spinning rides and blinking game booths. At one of the stalls, James stopped and handed the operator a few tokens. All right, Tommy. Pick your prize. Tommy's eyes widened. Just like that. James winked. Well, you've got to pop a few balloons first. Tommy picked up a small dart, and Rebecca watched from the side with her arms crossed lightly. A soft smile played at her lips as she observed the easy way James coached him. Not taking over, just encouraging. With one throw, Tommy hit a red balloon. Pop. Bullseye. James said, clapping enthusiastically. The attendant handed over a small plush dog with floppy ears and a cape stitched to its back. His name's Max, Tommy declared instantly. He's a superhero too. I can tell, James said with a laugh. After a few more games and one ride on the Ferris wheel, all three of them squeezed into the same car, Tommy clinging to Rebecca on the way up and to James on the way down. They found a bench near the carousel. Strings of lights twinkled above them as carousel horses spun in slow circles, the sound of calliope music drifting gently through the air. Tommy sat on the bench beside James, retelling the story of the day as if it had happened to someone else. And then the roller coaster went upside down and I didn't even throw up. James chuckled. You've got nerves of steel. I'm impressed. Mom closed her eyes the whole time, Tommy added with a giggle. Rebecca shook her head with a smile. I value my internal organs, thank you very much. They laughed, the sound easy and natural. Rebecca leaned back against the bench, her eyes scanning the crowd. Families, couples, kids running around with cotton candy. She realized something that sent a tiny jolt through her heart. They looked like one of them, a family together. She turned to James suddenly. Why? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. James didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, watching Tommy inspect the plush dog clutched tightly in his arms. Because I saw a little boy about to lose something he didn't even know he was about to lose, James said finally, his voice quiet and thoughtful. And a mother doing everything she could to keep him from feeling it. Rebecca felt her breath catch in her throat. The words settled over her like a warm blanket on a cold night. I didn't step in because I felt sorry for you, James added, turning to look directly at her. I stepped in because I saw strength. I saw love, the kind that fights, the kind that doesn't quit. Rebecca blinked quickly, wiping at her eye before a tear could fall. You don't even know us. I know enough, James said softly. Sometimes you don't need history to recognize something real. Rebecca looked away, trying to steady the storm of emotions brewing in her chest. She wasn't used to compliments that didn't feel like pity in disguise. She wasn't used to anyone seeing her beyond the worn clothes, the tired eyes, the constant weight she carried every single day. And here was this man, clearly wealthy, well-dressed, composed, looking at her like none of that mattered. Like she wasn't just surviving, but someone worthy of admiration and respect. I'm not someone who's used to being helped, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not someone who usually helps strangers, James replied with a soft smile. But maybe this wasn't random. Rebecca studied his face carefully. You think this was fate? James looked at Tommy, who was now curled up on the bench with his head resting against the plush dog. His eyelids were beginning to droop with exhaustion. I think it was something, James said thoughtfully. Call it fate, call it timing, call it whatever you want. Either way, I'm glad I was there. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Then, almost without realizing it, she whispered, So am I. The night ended quietly and peacefully. They carried Tommy, half asleep and completely content, to Rebecca's car. James opened the door for her, and she buckled Tommy into his seat, brushing a strand of hair gently from his forehead. Before she closed the door, Tommy mumbled sleepily, Thank you, Mr. James. Today was the best day ever. James smiled down at him. You're welcome, buddy. Happy birthday. Rebecca stood beside the car, unsure of how to say goodbye. The day had taken on a strange shape, something that felt less like a detour and more like the beginning of something she wasn't ready to define yet. Thank you, she said, her voice firmer now. For everything. I don't even know how to repay you. You don't need to, James said simply. Just don't treat it like a debt. Let it be what it was. She nodded slowly, considering his words. And what was it? James hesitated for just a moment, then met her eyes. A beginning, maybe. Rebecca stared at him for a beat longer, her heart pounding in her chest. Then she got into the car without another word. As she drove off into the night, she watched James in the rearview mirror. He stood by the curb with his hands in his coat pockets, his face unreadable in the darkness. And though she didn't know what would happen next, one thing was absolutely clear. Today had changed something. Not just for Tommy, for her too. Months passed like pages turning in a book. Autumn faded into winter, and winter melted into spring. James didn't disappear after that day. He showed up, consistently, quietly, steadily, weaving himself gently into their lives. He helped Tommy build his first snowman. He sat through school concerts, recording Tommy's off-key but enthusiastic performances with a grin that never left his face. He fixed things around Rebecca's small house, never making a big deal about it. And slowly, carefully, like two people learning to trust again, Rebecca and James fell in love. On Tommy's 6th birthday, James knelt down in front of Rebecca at Riverside Park, the same place where it all began, and asked her to marry him. She said yes without hesitation. The wedding was small and beautiful, held under the golden arch of spring flowers. Tommy wore a little suit and bounced with excitement, asking if he could finally call James Dad. Rebecca knelt down to his level and smiled. You can call him whatever feels right to you. Tommy thought for only a moment. I think Dad sounds perfect. When James took Rebecca's hands under that flowering arch and looked into her eyes, he knew the answer to the question he hadn't dared ask a year ago. What if this is more than kindness? It was love. It was home. It was family. And it had all started with a birthday cake she couldn't afford, and a stranger who chose to stay. Autumn faded into winter, and the leaves that once fluttered through Riverside Park had long since fallen. They were replaced by frost-laced sidewalks and the first quiet hush of snow. Rebecca found herself checking the window most mornings now, a coffee mug warm between her hands. She would watch Tommy stomp around in his little boots, pretending to fight imaginary snow monsters with Max the superhero dog tucked under one arm. And more often than not, James was there helping. Not in grand, over-the-top gestures like that first day, but in small, consistent ways that wove themselves gently into their lives. He never imposed. He never flaunted his wealth. He just showed up with steady hands, quiet words, and presence. He helped Tommy build his first snowman in the front yard. He sat through school concerts, recording Tommy's off-key but enthusiastic rendition of Jingle Bells, with a grin that never left his face. He even fixed a leaky kitchen pipe one evening like it was no big deal, though Rebecca later found out he had spent 3 hours on YouTube learning how to do it first. It was never about the things he could buy. It was the way he looked at them, like they weren't a charity project but something worth showing up for, something worth choosing. They started seeing more of each other slowly and gently, like snowflakes building a blanket. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just honest. Dinners became a routine. Not every night, but often enough that Rebecca stopped wondering if she was taking too much and started wondering if she was allowed to want more. It had been so long since someone looked at her with more than politeness. Since someone listened without waiting for their turn to talk. Since someone took real time to know her. One night, after Tommy had fallen asleep on the couch with a half-finished drawing in his lap, James helped her carry him to bed. She pulled the covers up under Tommy's chin and kissed his forehead softly. When she turned around, James was leaning against the doorframe, watching with a softness in his eyes that made her heart ache. I think he's in love with you, she said with a smile. He's not the only one, James replied quietly. Her breath caught. He didn't rush the silence that followed. He let it sit between them, not heavy but real. Juliana stepped into the hallway, closing Tommy's door gently behind her. I wasn't expecting any of this, she whispered. Neither was I, James said. Then slowly, like asking a question, he took her hand. She didn't pull away. They stood like that in the narrow hallway of her small home. Nothing fancy. No orchestra playing. Just the hum of the old heater and the quiet of two people who had found something neither of them had been looking for. Spring arrived, melting the last of winter's chill. Tommy turned 6 with a bigger party that year. Friends from school, homemade decorations, and a cake that Rebecca made herself. But James was still there, just as he had been the year before. Only this time he didn't just buy the cake. He helped bake it. They stood in the kitchen covered in flour, laughing as Tommy tried to sneak frosting off the spoon when he thought no one was looking. Don't think I didn't see that, James called out. I'm taste testing, Tommy protested, mouth full. Later that night, after the guest had gone and Tommy was asleep in bed with new toys scattered around him, James pulled Rebecca aside. Walk with me, he asked gently. They stepped outside where the spring breeze stirred the budding trees. I've been thinking, James said, pausing beside her front porch. I never believed in timing. I always thought you had to make things happen, force them, chase them down. Rebecca watched him, waiting. But that day in the bakery, he said, turning to face her, I didn't chase anything. I just listened. And something told me to speak, to offer, to stay. She looked up at him, her eyes soft, her heart pounding. I've never been a father, he continued. I've never even come close to that kind of life. But when I look at Tommy, when I look at you. He didn't finish the sentence. You didn't have to. James reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Not flashy. Not dramatic. Just simple and honest. I'm not asking you for a perfect answer or a perfect life, he said. I know things won't always be easy. But I want to try, with both of you, if you'll let me. Tears slipped quietly down Rebecca's cheeks. Not from shock. Not even from the proposal itself. But from the deep, soul-shaking realization that someone had chosen her. Not out of pity, not out of passing whim, but with eyes wide open. She nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Yes. James asked just to be sure. Yes, she whispered. They didn't rush the wedding. They didn't need to. By the time they stood in front of a small group of friends and family at Riverside Park, where it all began, Tommy was wearing a little suit and bouncing with excitement. Does this mean I get to call him Dad now? Tommy asked Rebecca before the ceremony. She smiled, kneeling down to his level. You can call him whatever feels right to you. Tommy thought for a moment, then grinned. I think Dad sounds perfect. When James took Rebecca's hands and looked into her eyes under the golden arch of spring flowers, he knew the answer to the question he hadn't dared ask a year ago. What if this is more than kindness? It was love. It was home. It was family. And it had all started with a cake she couldn't afford, and a stranger who chose to stay. We've come to the end of today's story, and I hope it touched your heart. Thank you for watching, and remember to subscribe for more powerful and inspiring stories. See you in the next one.